Welcome to Fort Collins Startup Week 2021. It is an honor to be here with you. I am here with the lovely Elizabeth Mahoney and Beth Allen on the panel of Navigating the New Normal, Tools and Stories and Best Practices for Leading Despite Disruption. It's hard to believe, but we are approaching the 1-year anniversary of COVID disrupting our lives and turning everything upside down at the time of this recording. And so we thought it would be really helpful for us to come together and just acknowledge what we've accomplished over the last year, celebrate the heroic feats. Even though there has been suffering and loss, there's been some amazing things that have occurred, and help people give tools for moving forward into the future. My name is Ariana Friedlander. I am the founder and principal of Rosabella Consulting, helping leaders doing business as unusual make the impossible possible. And I'm here with Elizabeth and Beth. Elizabeth, please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Ariana. Hi, I'm Elizabeth Mahoney with Complete Professional Development in Greeley, and I am a coach and consultant that supports individuals, managers, and teams through workplace transition. And I'm really excited to be here to talk with you all today.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. And Beth, please introduce yourself for everyone.
Hi, my name is Beth. I work for the Colorado Spirit program. We are partnered with SummitStone Health Partners currently, but we are a FEMA grant focused on emotional and mental support and resource connection for COVID-19.
Wonderful. Thanks, ladies. I think we have a lot of interesting things to discuss today. I started doing interviews of leaders about how COVID has impacted their workforce in the fall, and it's been really fascinating to look back on their experiences. It has been a hard year in so many ways, and there's been some amazing things that have happened. And so as we get started, would love for us to take a look back at the year. And I'm wondering, when you look back on the last year, living and working through a global pandemic, what about this experience stands out for you personally and professionally? Beth, would you like to start?
Yeah, so 2020 was actually my graduation from college year. So professionally, thank you. So personally, I had a very different graduation year than I thought I would, both not getting the graduation ceremony, and I'm sure many people can relate to having events that they were looking forward to canceled. But also starting my career out in a global pandemic has been interesting, but I've learned to be adaptable and have a diverse work experience. And I think that it's going to end up making me stronger in my career.
Wow. Yeah, it's so wonderful to have your perspective here, recognizing, that starting your career during a pandemic is, quite an unusual circumstance to be in. So your perspective is so greatly valued and appreciated.
Happy to be here and give it.
Elizabeth, how about for you?
Thank you, Ariana. Yeah, for me, what really stood out was as a business owner. So I started 2020, both in higher education part-time and focusing on my business. And what I noticed is, like, personally for me, what really stood out is just how much of a people person I am and how much I need people. So that was really hard, the transition of not being able to be around my friends as readily or my family. My mom celebrated a big birthday, and my niece graduated from college from UNC where I worked, and that was the first graduation that I didn't go to because we didn't have it. So that was difficult. As far as like professionally, it certainly has been the year of the pivot. And I know that many of you that are doing startups and that type of thing, that you have gone through that, or managing teams, just trying to figure out what are we doing next. Certainly I have felt that as well. With my coaching and consulting business, I was working with managers and teams on more of like communication development and strengths, leadership, and that type of thing within their organizations, and that definitely changed. It was more of a time for people to really try to figure out how are we going to navigate the new normal and that type of thing. So certainly my business declined, and I had to figure out how I was going to be able to support managers and teams and businesses through this transition.
Yeah, thank you, Elizabeth. It's great to have your perspective here as well, supporting managers and leaders, and like you said, really working towards people's strengths. I can only imagine from what I've seen how important it is for us to operate from that place of our gifts rather than our deficits when we are navigating these kinds of challenges. And as you mentioned too, I think it's really important for those viewing the panel to take a moment to reflect on what you notice for yourself personally and professionally in navigating the last year. You know, I think for myself, I can recall that Fort Collins Startup Week last year was one of like the last kind of normal events I went to. And, you know, I kind of see it when I look through my pictures on my phone. You know, there's pictures of Startup Week and then a few other things that I was out and about around people. And then suddenly my camera scroll looks a lot different. And I recall when we went into lockdown, having this feeling of like, oh, we just have to hunker down for 6 weeks. You know, maybe you can relate. You know, it seemed like there was this, you know, oh, this is short term, and it didn't take long to realize that that this was a long haul. And I think that really changes things for myself and for others when we notice that it's not just like this short-term burst of energy and problem solving that we need to engage in, when it really is this long-term thing. And so it's really been this experience for me, as you've said, Elizabeth, adapting and pivoting, seeing how my business was operating just completely change, a lot of work just evaporating, and for understandable reasons, you know, and really figuring out like, okay, how do I meet and serve leaders where they are at now, and noticing that where they were at shifted so dramatically, what really feels like overnight. I mean, it was just instantaneous from what I've heard from other leaders too. I'm wondering for each of you, what have you seen other leaders doing in the last year that you really admire? Elizabeth, do you want to start?
Yeah, you know, I'd say the thing that I also did some focus groups and talking with leaders, and the one thing that I really noticed was the resiliency that they demonstrated, and the creativity, also being very like empathetic towards what was going on, and certainly as much as possible supportive to their teams. I think communication has been just a thing that's been really difficult because there's been so much unknown. And so just to see leaders trying to navigate what does that communication look like to the teams, and balancing, I even heard that in some focus group, like how do I balance, you know, letting them know what they need to know and also not freaking them out. So I think those are some real things that leaders have had to, you know, especially leaders that have had to lead people have had to figure out how to navigate. And then I think for people that are more like solopreneurs or business owners and that type of thing, also there's that piece of like, what are we doing now with our business and how has that transitioned and changed? And so again, I come back to that resiliency of and creativity and figuring out what is it going to look like next. So perseverance.
Right. Yeah, I so agree. There's been some really inspiring stories that have emerged in the last year, and things that I know teams didn't think they could do, or thought that it would take so much longer. And now they're doing it. You know, they've really accelerated some changes that were already in place, which is cool to see. And I wonder how that resonates for you, listeners. You know, have you seen some of the changes that you were intending accelerating? And what do you admire in the leaders that you've been observing in the last year? What about for you, Beth?
Yeah, I love what Elizabeth said about the communication aspect of it. I am really drawn to leaders who have open communication. I personally would much rather hear hey, we are working through how we're going to transition our weekly meetings so that the majority of you can be here virtually. Bear with us while we're going through some of these technical changes, and we will let you know when we know. In my mind, that takes away a level of uncertainty that is not necessary. Like, we can have these conversations and then everyone is clear-minded going into those meetings. So I just appreciate that open communication from my leadership team.
That's awesome, Beth. And I totally agree. And I've seen that as well. And it's interesting because one of the reasons I think what you experience with that open communication, and especially the we don't know yet type of communication that happens, is that a lot of leaders might want to wait until they know before they communicate. And that just creates a lot of opportunity for fear to really occur because our brains just make up stories. And so when we don't have information from others, we fill in the blank, and it's usually not a very pretty picture. And that's definitely one of the things I feel like I've seen in leaders as well, is when they're really willing and committed to have those open conversations, sharing the we don't know yet updates can be really powerful. I've also seen a lot of just teams coming together, a lot of compassion that was not always present in the workplace, or was important to be present in the workplace, but didn't get sustained all the time. And so I think that the compassion and ways that teams have come together to support each other. I talked to a number of organizations that in the last year got rid of kind of the number of days you could take off, and just like have it take off when you need to take off, and not limiting people, and really supporting them, and really meeting their personal needs, and recognizing that when their team members are meeting their personal needs, they are able to do better at work together. And just this collective effort, I think that leaders really empowered and enabled their teams to come together. And so I think that that's really cool. And there have also been just cool stories of businesses pivoting and really finding ways to support the needs of the community. For my own business, I started hosting journal jams on Zoom in March of 2020, because I could see this fever pitch, the stress, the overwhelm, the uncertainty weighing people down so much, and could recognize for myself that journaling was this practice that was helping me find groundedness and centeredness and equilibrium. And so being able to introduce that, and having seen leaders in our community step up and support journaling among their team members, that have radial development group sponsors them and encourages their team members to come because they see the value and importance of that practice. And I just think things like that, resources like that, are so cool to offer to the team members. One of the things that's been interesting, I've heard from fellow entrepreneurs and startups, as well as from leaders, is how important it's been to support and address mental health in the last year. And Beth, since you are affiliated with SummitStone, I was wondering if you could tell us some of the things that you've seen emerge during this time around mental health.
Yeah, so one of the biggest changes that I've noticed is the open communication and conversations about mental health and self-care and all of those aspects, which I obviously think is great. One thing that I do want to point out to the leaders watching this is that I really believe in the oxygen mask kind of analogy of, you need to have your oxygen mask on first before you can help others with theirs. Burnout and compassion fatigue are occupational hazards. They are very real. They are also very preventable. Occupational hazards like the burnout and the compassion fatigue can be combated with self-care and resilience training and building. So some ways that we can build resilience within our team and within ourselves is the ability to self-calm, and really working through our emotions first, and taking a deep breath, and reassuring self-talk, and using our self-care, the different coping mechanisms that we all have and are fun for us. And maybe we don't even realize are refilling our own buckets. But also just the emotional expressiveness and the awareness of the emotions that we have to work through. And then really focusing on the sense of optimism and hope and the sense that your life is worth this working through these times, and that we are going to work through them and we're going to come out stronger. And really using your social supports. And I know that that's hard right now with the changing environments, but getting creative, like watching Netflix shows at the same time with your friends, or using your coworkers and peers to really build that circle and that support system.
Yeah.
I think it's also, sorry, one more thing I was going to say
ahead,
is
yeah.
I think it's also important to think about the fact that self-care is so many different categories. We all wish that a bath bomb could really solve all of our issues, and sometimes it does, but it's important to also think about our social self-care, our spiritual self-care, whether that's going outside or doing a religious practice, on our work and professional self-care, having those boundaries and work-life balance are all really important to keep in mind also.
That's awesome, Beth. Everything you're saying really resonates with me. And one of the leaders that I interviewed said that his team coined a new term in practice in the last year, and that's DEAGOD. It's DEAGOD, and it's drop everything and go outside, damn it. And and so it really fits for their culture and the work that they do. And so anytime someone would say that in chat or on Zoom or at any point, like through email, it gave the team members permission to just get up. They didn't have to like finish. And I think so often we try to push ourselves through, and when we're running a sprint, it's easy to push through, but this hasn't been a sprint, it's been a marathon. And what you're describing as resilience really resonates for me as well. I've been completing a certification with the HeartMath Institute as a heart math coach. And their definition of resilience is the capacity to prepare for and bounce back from adversity, essentially. And I think that that's really striking for me to think of resilience as capacity, because I always just thought it was bounce back. And when you think about the capacity component and whether or not you have capacity or you're in need of building capacity, just changes everything. And I really could see that for the leaders that have, struggled. There were some leaders I interviewed that couldn't get out of bed for weeks because their business was so badly impacted, and they just didn't have the capacity. At that point, they'd been already running on empty. And so then when COVID hit, it was so much harder to navigate that disruption. Whereas the leaders that had some self-care practices in place were really, not like they weren't affected, but they had the capacity to rebound and to respond intentionally and actively. And so I think that that's just a really interesting piece to take into consideration is, where's your capacity at? And, if we're not continually, daily building our capacity, we're going to struggle whenever any disruption occurs, and this past year, especially in Northern Colorado and other parts of the country, it's not just been COVID, it's also been wildfires. In natural disasters. And so we're seeing disruption almost becoming like a way of just life. So these tools and lessons learned are applicable even beyond this pandemic. And I think that's something important for everyone to consider, including those of you watching this now. I wonder.
That actually brings up one more point I'd love to touch on, is that we talk about burnout all the time, but burnout is an excessive and prolonged stress. And sorry. And we have to think about ourselves in a way we think of maybe like a phone charging. Like right. We use our battery all day. Do you want me to stop?
No, keep going.
Okay. We use our phone battery all day, and we can't expect our own personal batteries to go up to 20% charge because we take a 2-week vacation once a year and then use that 20% every day. You really need to charge your phone every night, your own personal battery every day, using these self-care practices often and routinely to be able to keep your battery going, and then put that out into your the rest of your team and be those leaders that we know that you all are.
And I think that's Beth, I love that. I think that's especially true right now when we got to think about, it is very different for everybody that went to work from home, work remotely, and they were in-person teams before. It's harder, it's different to be a manager of a work from home team or virtual team versus an in-person team. And it's also different for employees. So there's certainly that learning curve. And when we're learning new things and we're still trying to operate in what we know, I know just even for like, how often do you have, your team meetings? Like when we first went into the shutdown and everything, I was still in higher education part-time, and we were having meetings like we were in person and that type of thing, and we were on Zoom and we were just fatigued. We're getting Zoom fatigue. And I think that's really important to kind of navigate. And part of that self-care can be, checking in with your employees too. So certainly, checking in with yourself and seeing how can you, give yourself some balance. And I loved the tips about, what Ariana said about, now I don't remember the acronym, but, getting outside, just, anytime that you want to, maybe encouraging employees to have an extended lunch break, because they are doing so much, and most likely they're working outside of the times of like what we might consider the normal work times when we're doing in person, right? Like I know I'm checking my email later in the evening and that type of thing. And I think a lot of people are doing that. And so just figuring out how can we be flexible, right, with ourselves and that type of thing. And I think it's still important to, what are the team rules, like especially when things are a bit chaotic and still seeming to be chaotic. Like we said before, the sprint is in the long haul. And so I think that's one of the things too. One thing with this that I thought about was just the fear people have of coming back to work. I think that's a real thing that we're going to be experiencing as people are transitioning. And I know that, Gallup did a study in October of last year, and they found that 2/3 of the people that started working remotely due to the pandemic have now indicated that they would like to have some sort of blended in-person work and work from home. So I think something, even mental health wise, as much as you can kind of co-create and figure out with your teams or even for your business, like what does that look like? What are maybe our new hours of operation, for example? How can we, meet people differently? I haven't seen anybody in my office. I'm in my office for my business, but I haven't seen people in my office in person throughout the pandemic, but I've met with them virtually here because it's still, for my mental health, gives me a place to go and that type of thing. So I think those are all really, neat things to try to figure out what works for you and your teams too.
Yeah, I think those are really good points, Elizabeth. And I think one of the things that we've seen through this is that, treating everyone fairly is not treating them all the same. And each team member has unique needs. And I know some of the clients I've been working with have gone to a completely remote, team. And as they're anticipating coming back to work, they see maybe a hybrid. And that actually, from what I've heard, has been the hardest to manage when your team is partly remote and part in person, because, some people on Zoom and some people not on Zoom is like the worst. And so really it's, again, that open communication. I've been hearing a lot about the importance of one-on-ones. Having those one-on-one conversations, phone calls, walking meetings, and we talked about the battery earlier, and I just can't help but laugh because I did not charge my light battery. And it's showing now. So we can laugh about that, but it happens, right? You don't charge your battery, including your light, and you're halfway through a panel discussion and in the dark. But we're committed to continuing to provide some value and insight for everyone. And I feel like we've talked a lot about what enables leaders and entrepreneurs to successfully navigate disruptions like COVID. I'm wondering if there's anything else that comes to mind for either of you in terms of what helps leaders and managers and founders successfully navigate disruption in general.
I think just, one thing that I was kind of reflecting on with this was just recognizing and realizing that, like, especially, for people who are, there's just fatigue, right? There's fatigue of being online, and that type of thing. And so I think that's one thing. There's also no separation right now between roles that we play. So if we are a parent, right? We're likely doing some sort of schooling with our children while we're trying to work. And there's really not that separation between home and work. And so I think if there is a way to make sure that there's some sort of separation, I still know people, and when I'm at home, I'm working from my dining room table. Like, I'm like, you know what, I maybe need to update that spare bedroom and just make it an office at this point. So I do have that. But, I think that we've been thinking this will get back to normal, and we'll be going back and that type of thing. And so we've been kind of just having this temporary space of what our workspace looks like. And so whatever kind of consistency or boundary that we can put between work and home can be something. And that may be at times that saying to the family, hey, I need this hour of focus time, right? And so do not disturb me unless if there is something big going on. Also, I think the other thing that kind of came to mind was, people who do not have other people living with them, they may be very isolated right now. And so also recognizing that as well with your employees. And so, Ariana, I think it's like what you said, really, this is the time to really look at each employee individually and kind of treat them as individual people, even more so than ever.
I completely agree. I am working from home, just me and my pug, and I am definitely a self-proclaimed extrovert, and I am itching to get back into the office, but I know that a lot of my peers and my friends and coworkers are like, we could be doing this forever. I am so happy that you can't tell that I'm wearing sweatpants right now. So I do think that a lot of that has to do with our professional self-care that we talked about earlier, and kind of having maybe a designated place, maybe a designated time of day where no matter what, we're shutting our laptop and we're doing something different, and doing something that's not maybe screen related or sitting or moving, and just kind of making sure that we're balancing out those different aspects of our lives for sure.
Yeah, and I love that you bring that up, because for me, it's been an extra challenge during the winter months, at least in Greeley or northern Colorado, because it's cold, right? And so like that going, we're lucky generally, but we've had a couple of weeks of, just real cold days that it's like, I don't want to go outside. It's too cold. And so then I really feel isolated in my home when I'm experiencing that.
Yeah, I know I've had to force myself to bundle up, right, and go outside. And that might relate for some of you watching as well. What are the things that you've had to kind of just force yourself to do, even though you might not have wanted to in the moment, but you feel better having done it later. I also think one of the things I've recognized, especially, I serve on the nonprofit board of directors for a retreat center in Grand Lake. And so we, this past year has been incredibly challenging in so many ways. We lost like 80% of our revenue due to COVID. Then the wildfires, the East Troublesome fire came, onto our property. The firefighters were able to put it out, which was amazing. So the buildings still stand. There's still, remediation work that needs to be done. And so it's just been curveball after curveball. And what I've noticed, we've been like thriving as an organization despite that. And what I noticed is that there's just this openness to being flexible. There's this willingness to try new things. And there's this acknowledgement of what's been lost, of the pain and the heartache and the hurt. Because there's a lot of traditions that we couldn't sustain during COVID that, we'll bring back as soon as it is safe for us to. But it's not the same when you're not gathering with like 50 volunteers on Memorial Day weekend to open the place. And
Mhm.
so we've just had to be flexible and try things and just step one foot in front of the other, not knowing what was going to be coming down the line later,
Mhm.
not knowing how this idea was going to pan out. And part of the reason that worked was because there was this collective effort. We were all working together, other staff and volunteers just working together. And so when you're not carrying the burden entirely on your own, I think that helps. And to your point, Beth, for solopreneurs, and I'm one of those, so I get it. For me, it's really been finding those networks, those people that I can be real with,
Mhm.
and I have different friends I can be real with about different parts and aspects of what my entrepreneurial life looks like. But that support, that collective effort really makes just a tremendous difference.
Yeah.
So.
And you
I
make me think, Ariana, about just how hard it has been to be a leader right now, in the past year, a business owner and that type of thing. And I think their natural ability for problem solving and, being able to fix problems and that want to do it, I think is something that is really probably a great skill that they've had that's helped them be successful through this. Obviously, along with their caring for their employees and that type of thing. I'm sure that is also a challenging thing at times too, to try to figure out like, well, how do we adapt and how do we fix it? It's not fixable right now, and that type of thing. So sorry, Beth.
No, you're fine. I love what you were saying. I agree with that also in the sense that I'm just so impressed with all of the businesses and the area just really adapting and diversifying their practices to work with the times that are going on and the amount of to-go orders I place at all of my local favorite restaurants, and that they have a whole new setup every time I go. It's great. I was going to just go back to the point of just creating your network. One thing that I love that my team does now is we have our weekly meeting where we talk all business and house cleaning and everything. But then we also have a meeting weekly where we don't talk about work at all. We talk about what crazy thing our dog is doing or how we're feeling or anything that is just personal, because we don't get that water cooler conversation that we used to have in person. And so it's kind of creates a time for we can just be fun teammates and peers and really talk about our feelings and what's going on in our lives. An additional space and time from our actual work.
Yeah, that pop-in culture, right? Like, I mean, we used to just be able to be, hey, the door's open, right? Like, what a cool thing for a leader to be able to say, my door's always open, And if it's not, that means that I'm actually doing something, right? But that door is now a virtual door, and it's hard to see when it's open. So I think that's a neat point that you bring up, Beth.
Yeah, and it's so important too, because we know that connection is what builds trust. And
Mhm.
so when we do just get right down to business, which is one of the pitfalls of remote working, oftentimes meetings are so much more focused, and there isn't that natural water cooler conversation or run-in conversation happening, that it can erode trust if we don't intentionally make those efforts to connect and build the relationship with peers and colleagues and team members. And that enables us to have the trust to manage, unforeseen things occurring like we've experienced in the last year.
Yeah.
I wonder what about our experiences in the last year do you believe we have to acknowledge as we move forward?
Well, I mean, I'll go ahead and start this one off, but I really think that the sooner that we can recognize and realize that we're not likely in the workforce and in the world of work, we're not likely to return to what it was like pre-shutdown last year, 100%. Like, I just don't see that everything will go back to all in person for teams or businesses that have figured out how to do some remote aspects. There are obviously industries out there that have been in person throughout the pandemic, and those, are likely to stay. I think that's another thing too, is just, for people that are leading teams in healthcare or, law enforcement and that type of thing. I think there's, a lot to be said, like the support and mental health support that people are going to need coming out of those more emergency areas post-pandemic. But I think once realizing what that is not likely to be the same way that it was, even when we come back together, and really starting to recognize and have that opportunity to start to identify what does that look like for your team, and really get buy-in from your team. Even for like solopreneurs or business owners, what are your customers wanting? Like, this is a neat opportunity. I mean, we've seen it happen, like restaurants. I mean, they've done to-go orders. They're, and at a different level, right? They're able to sell things that they hadn't been able to sell before. And so I think that's a really cool opportunity to see what are the opportunities out there that this pandemic brought forth to you as a leader of a team or as a leader of a business, and how can you implement those things that you have found throughout the last year that you want to keep. So it's almost like a opportunity to rewrite, right, your business plan, or what is your team's goals and that type of thing, and how do you want to show up as a team.
Nice. Thanks, Elizabeth. What about for you, Beth?
Can you repeat the question? I'm so sorry. I missed it. And I was so focused on everything great that Elizabeth was saying.
Oh, yeah. Just what about our experiences in the last year do you believe we must acknowledge to move forward?
I've already mentioned this, but I just think that I am so impressed with all of the business owners in our area being so adaptive and diversifying so much. I completely agree with Elizabeth saying that we are at this kind of cool crossroads where we can really rebuild and focus on what our values as our teams and our company cultures are, and kind of making these hybrid situations and building up what we want our lives to look like.
Yeah. One of the things that that question brings for me, is that all change is loss. And all loss needs to be mourned. It's a quote. I can't remember who said it right now, but I always think that it's really important to recognize and acknowledge that, that there have been some positive things that have come out of these disruptions that we've endured. And even those changes that feel positive create a sense of loss for many people. And so I've found it really important to acknowledge the loss and really face it and grieve it. And I've, in a number of conversations with leaders, even just given them permission to grieve. You might relate to this. What do you find that a change is that you need to mourn and loss? It's something that I think all of us can relate to and really connect with. At the same time, it's really, I feel like, important to take this as an opportunity for us to really identify those lessons learned, experiences, or silver linings that we want to carry forward, because there have been some positive changes. And so, above and beyond what you've already shared, what do you hope to carry forward from this? And what do you hope other leaders and entrepreneurs carry forward from what we've endured in the last year? Beth, do you want to start?
Yeah. I loved what you said about mourning the losses, because when this all started, I was so focused on, I'm sure it's common for all of us to do, but focusing on the fact of, oh, I don't get to go out and do these things, and I don't get to be a college student anymore the way that I was before, and experiencing those things. But one thing that really helped me is I sat down and I really wrote out, what have I accomplished over the last year, and what have I succeeded at? And then also thinking about what out of those things what are more possible or more needed or more fostered because I'm sitting in my thoughts more, or I'm focusing on different work avenues that I could be doing. And that's something that I still have to remind myself. And I'm glad that you brought it up, because there is so many things that I think that I've learned throughout this last year, and practices and being okay, being in solidarity for more time than I was used to, that I really think are going to help me be a more well-rounded and empathetic and adaptable person, woman, business owner in the future. So I do think that it's really important to acknowledge the strengths that we have been able to work on and have and develop and foster, and some of the positives that have happened from this time.
Nice. Yeah, that resonates for me. And one of the things I think of is for myself, just the way we've slowed down a lot. I like the opportunity to feel like I can be more present, that I'm not feeling that pressure to rush around all the time. That was this persistent low grade energy drain for me before. And so I'm mindful that I really want to carry that forward personally, as we do shift into this next phase of COVID, with the vaccine rolling out and everything. I think one of the things I'd like to see for leaders and for teams and entrepreneurs is the recognition that change is possible. That if that is what you're working towards, that you can actually create that change, and actually you'll create even a better change than you ever imagined possible if you work with others and make it a collective effort. And I think that's one of the things that I've seen in the last year, where there's just been some amazing collective work being done by teams. And I would love to see that carry forward in the next year. What about for you, Elizabeth?
Yeah, and I think that also gives the opportunity for real buy-in and accountability. When you have everybody on board, helping with making some of the decisions. Not all decisions can be made by everybody, but at least having their input heard and that type of thing, and policies implemented based upon it. I mean, I even think, really moving forward, having some sort of, work from home policy or flexibility in the day is my hope too. And, I think that's obviously going to look different for every team. And that's, again, I think where a real opportunity is to be able to do that. And I would say, you bring up loss and everything, and, you out there may have, lost an employee due to COVID, or during this time due to something different. Also, there's other people that you may have lost in your life, and us being able to mourn and grieve loss has definitely changed during this time, with not being able to have, funerals or celebrations the way that we normally would be able to. And so I think it's kind of recognizing and understanding that, and really, getting support and allowing yourself and your team, especially if you did have a team member. I know for the company that I'm a board member of, we had a team member who died of COVID. And so that's definitely something that we have been, as an organization, dealing with, the real reality of this. And if that's happened to you, or if you know somebody that has died of that, that's a fear that comes into place too. So I appreciate, Ariana, you bringing that aspect up with this.
Yeah, thank you. And I do think it is important that we honor the losses that have occurred, especially the loss of life that has occurred in this last year. I wonder, as we wrap up, what's one thing that you want to tell the leaders and entrepreneurs watching this in closing?
I'll start. You have done an amazing job. I have thought multiple times, I've managed people for over 20 years, and I have thought multiple times, I'm actually kind of glad I'm just in charge of myself and my business right now, because it's been challenging enough as it is. And so I want to applaud each and every one of you that has led people, that has led a business during this time. I think that this is, again, the perfect time to listen to your employees, listen to yourselves, and really decide what you want your future to look like moving forward as a company, as a team, and as just a group of people.
Awesome.
I loved that, the looking forward aspect of it. I'm going to take this question a little bit differently. One thing that I want to tell everybody, especially leaders, is self-care is for everybody. It looks different for everybody, but it is necessary for everybody. Practice makes perfect. It takes some time to make routine and to keep them, but refilling your cup and your battery is going to help you look at your life differently and more positively and be able to put that light out into the world also. So self-care is necessary.
That's awesome. Those are both great words moving forward. And I'll just add that that I think that this has been an opportunity for us to really deepen in our self-awareness and our presence and our awareness of others, and that's a powerful and beautiful gift. And I think what I've seen, and I would encourage you to just notice in yourself and in others around you, is that when we let things trigger a fear response within us, and we go into a threat response of fight, flight, freeze, or appease, we really limit our abilities to navigate complex situations and problems. And so with that awareness, just asking yourself what if questions, showing yourself compassion, really shifting out of that threat response. Because when I've seen leaders do that in the last year, and when I've experienced that myself, amazing things are possible. And so just to recognize that that's part of our shared humanity. We all experience that, and we're not alone. You're not alone in experiencing that. There's been a lot of fear that I think the pandemic, the wildfires, the natural disasters, all of it has really brought up for all of us. It's been very palatable. And yet, as FDR famously said, there's nothing to fear but fear itself. As long as we stay stuck in the fear, we can't get anything done. And so we really have to move beyond it and be active and engaged and show the way, pave the way for others. I wonder if anyone wants to get in touch with either of you after watching this. What's the best way for them to reach out to you? Elizabeth, do you want to start?
Sure. You can reach out to me at mahoney@completeprodev.com. If you're on Facebook, I do have a Facebook group called Supporting Managers and Leaders in Business. Would love to have you request to join that group. And my website is https://completeprodev.com.
Great. Thanks, Elizabeth. What about you, Beth?
Yeah, the best way to get a hold of me personally is via email. It's beth.allen@SummitStoneHealthPartners.org. My team actually has a local anonymous support line, and it's a super easy number. It's 970-221-5551. There is somebody there all the time to talk 7 days a week. And that line is a non-crisis number to really talk through how we're feeling about COVID and get resources and support and connections to move forward as a community.
That's great. Thanks so much for sharing that, Beth. Would you say the number one more time, just in case someone didn't capture it?
970-221-5551.
Awesome. And if you want to connect with me, the best way is through my website, rosabellaconsulting.com. That's ROSABELLA.com. There's a contact me form in there, as well as links to my social media profiles. It's really been an honor to share some time with these wonderful ladies and with you, to take some time out of your day and reflect back on the last year, celebrate the accomplishments that you've had and you've witnessed around you. Hopefully you can carry that forward with others. And maybe you can identify one thing from this panel, one actionable idea that you heard that you would like to experiment with moving forward. We shared a lot of different ideas, a lot of different tools, but I encourage you to take a moment to think of one thing, maybe write it down. I'm always a fan of writing in your journal if you have one, or your planner. I'll write one thing down and just make a concerted effort to really work on that. You don't have to do everything, but if you do just one thing, you might see a major difference. When we try to do too much, we don't get as much done. I'm sure you can relate. Thanks again. Thank you, Beth. Thank you, Elizabeth. It's really been a pleasure.
Thank you, Ariana. Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.